I left Germany for the UK. Now, I didn't leave for good, but this time it's been really very different. I didn't stay in a hotel or with friends. I stayed in an apartment, which felt very much like home. And for the most part, I had very similar routines, and the rhythm of my life was very similar to how it is back in Germany. I ate breakfast at home, I cooked at home, I did the laundry, I had visitors, my family visited me, and even some friends from Germany. And even though I've been gone for 15 years, things did feel very familiar, and in a sense it felt a little bit like coming back home. Just to give you a little bit of context, I left the UK a long time ago in 2008, and it really feels like a different era, almost a different time. You know, there were no smartphones, there was no social media, at least not in the way that we know it today. The UK was still a part of the EU, the Queen was still alive, and most importantly, I still had hair. One thing I've noticed is that self-criticism comes extremely easy to the English-speaking West, and also countries like Germany. We are really our very own worst critics in many ways, and I do believe that a certain level of self-criticism, if it's constructive, is necessary for progress. But there can be a situation where this criticism becomes pathological and it begins to eat away the culture from within. And this is a situation which I see as extremely toxic and something which should be guarded against at all costs. But it is also a situation which I can fully identify with. Part of the reason I left the UK was out of frustration. I didn't agree with the politics, I couldn't really identify with the culture, and I really wanted to see how other people did things. I wanted to experience other countries and cultures, and maybe this is just sort of a normal part of growing up. Maybe we all go through this at a certain stage in our life, but I just couldn't wait to get out of there. And now, having lived in China, Australia, and Germany, I do feel like I can give a somewhat unique perspective on the UK. Now, I do still live in Germany, I do not work in the UK, and really I'm just a dude on the internet, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. There are objective advantages and disadvantages of living in any country. You know, one of the huge advantages of living in the UK is the language. It just so happens at this time in history, English is the global language. And it's actually one of the reasons that led me to go to China. You know, without having been a native English speaker, I probably would not have ended up going there. And it is something that I take for granted. Traveling can really help me to realize how lucky I am to have this skill, basically just because of where I was born. But on top of these objective quantifiable metrics, there is a really thick layer of personal experience, personal circumstance, and just every individual situation, which really is not to be underestimated. When we are not in a good place, when we are not completely satisfied with our lives, when we feel like something is off or missing or wrong, the tendency is to look elsewhere and think, my life would be much better over there. And, you know, it could be. A change is as good as a rest, as they say. But the grass is also not always greener on the other side. Any discussion of England and the UK, I think really has to start with London, because the country of England and the United Kingdom really revolves around the city of London. Now, there are many things I could say about London, but I think the best way to sum up would be, without any irony, that London is special. London is a truly world-class city. It is epic, it is powerful and grand, and there is a deep, rich, intoxicating energy that sucks you in and pulls you along. And it's a city that I would recommend anyone to visit. But it is, in a sense, almost too big for the country. Because unlike Germany or Australia, London is not just the political capital of England and the UK, it is really the capital of everything. Whether you're talking about business, finance, culture, the arts, everything happens and centers around London. And because of this imbalance, there exists a rather unhealthy dynamic where much of the country's wealth is concentrated in and concentrated around London, with much of it not really even coming from within the country itself. And it's a city that I love to visit, but I could never live there. If I were to put my finger on the cultural pulse of the UK and give a layman's diagnosis, I would say that the UK, or maybe more specifically England, is undergoing an intense identity crisis. Even the most basic assumption, such as the UK or England is a Christian country, is not necessarily really accurate anymore. In the latest census from 2021, less than 50% of people in England and Wales identified as Christian, and the number of people without any religion increased dramatically. Some are calling it a crisis of religion. This coupled together with the cost of living crisis and a mental health crisis, that is a whole lot of crises right there. So where is this coming from, you might ask? Well, that is a very interesting question, one which I don't think has a definitive or final complete answer. My guess would be that it goes back really a very long way. I don't think this is something that has happened just the last couple of years. And although this is not specific to England, I do think that the decline of religion and the move away from the nuclear family has played a role. This, coupled together with ever more countries seeking independence and breaking from the Commonwealth, as well as the establishment of devolved institutions in Scotland and Wales, really leaves England facing some tough questions. The UK is an incredibly diverse and multicultural society, and this has for many years been its guiding light when talking about cultural identity. And I do think it's still accurate. It is a very open, a very accepting culture, and I did mention in my previous video how much room the individual has here to breathe. But a lot has happened in the last few years, not least of all Brexit and the Queen's death. This really has dealt a heavy blow to this idea or this construct of identity and really, put England's role within the UK to question. For many, Brexit represents a break with this diversity narrative, and it's not really just about the economic impact on individuals, it's more about the emotional aspect of Britain having excluded itself from this union and in many ways is sort of going it alone. One thing which I think is difficult for continental Europeans to understand is that the country of England shares culturally a lot more with other English-speaking countries such as the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. These kind of countries, there is a very sort of long shared history. And I know, before you light the comments on fire, it's a very emotional topic, but just the fact we share a language is huge. I can go to Australia or Canada or the US and pretty much from the get-go feel relatively at home just because I speak the same language. Now try moving to another country where you don't speak the language. You will, I'm sure, experience quite a bit of uncomfortableness, and there will be a long period of integration. During my time back here, I have heard about the woes of the Postal Service and the Royal Mail. I've heard about the rise of mental health issues and long COVID and also complaints about the NHS. But I have also experienced something different, something which I will call the British spirit. As seen in the manicured historic towns and multitude of cultural festivals and events, in the award-winning coffee, pies and cake, the campaign to support and shop British-made, British-grown and British-sourced food. It's seen in the BAFTAs, the celebration of homegrown musical talent, and it is in short the unashamed belief that this country has a lot to offer, and it's okay to talk about that and to celebrate that. it is possible to take pride in one's own culture without having to degrade anyone else's. And by the way, this pride in England or in the UK is very subtle when compared to other countries like France or Italy. Whether it's talking about the food or the wine or the language or the landscape, the beaches, the mountains, whatever it is, you will definitely hear about the culture of these countries from these people wherever you are in the world. The reason this British spirit, for lack of a better term, has struck me is because I am coming at it through the German lens. In a sense, I would say it is more the norm to talk positively about your own country. But when it comes to Germany, it is really highly unusual to hear Germans talking positively about their own culture. And usually the biggest proponents of German culture are foreigners, are people with an outside perspective. At least that has been my experience. In short, both countries have a lot to offer. I thoroughly appreciate my life in Germany, and all things considered, I do believe that my standard or my quality of life in Germany is better than it would be in the UK. But that's pretty subjective. It really depends on your own personal circumstances and situation. I know that black and white polarization does very well here on YouTube, and there are probably many people that would have preferred a video where I just list the ways in which one country is better than the other. But that's not what I'm about. And I think it would be doing you a disservice if I made a video like that. The older I get, the more nuance I see, and especially when talking about complex issues such as culture, a simplified black and white perspective can be very seductive and can gain traction very quickly. It would be so easy to attribute all the problems in the UK to Brexit. If only we rejoined the EU, everything would be solved. I think this is a little bit too simplistic, but what I do know is that the UK is an incredibly diverse country with a rich, long, complex culture and history, and it's one that the Germans love. And I know this because I went to a lot of towns, a lot of villages, beaches, countryside in England. Wherever I went, I heard German. The Germans are everywhere in the UK. And I think that out of all of the European countries, the Germans and the Brits have the most in common. And that is a beautiful thing.